Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. So, Kerry Morgan was Cassie's best friend from 2001 to 2018. And 2018, Kerry said that Diddy assaulted her. After that happened, Kerry said that Cassie did not support her, so she ended her friendship with Cassie. Kerry made it clear that she was only in court testifying because she was issued a subpoena by the government. She said she did not want to testify and that she moved on with her life. Her testimony was not long. She testified right after Dawn Richard. This is what she said. So the jury enters, and then the prosecutor says the government calls Kerry Morgan. Prosecutor says, "Where do you live?" Kerry Morgan says, "Los Angeles." Prosecutor says, "Who is this?" Photo shown. Kerry says, "Cassie Ventura." Prosecutor says, "What was your relationship?" Kerry says, "We were best friends. Her boyfriend assaulted me." Prosecutor says, "Do you see him here?" Kerry says, "Yes, right there in a yellow sweater." Prosecutor says, "Let the record reflect the witness had identified defendant Sean Combs." Prosecutor says, "Why are you here?" Kerry says, "I do not want to testify, but I was subpoenaed. I have moved on with my life." Prosecutor says, "Where did you live with Cassie?" Kerry says, "Manhattan." Prosecutor says, "Did Cassie drink?" Kerry says, "Not much." Prosecutor says, "Any drugs?" Kerry says, "None." Remember, this was then, in the beginning. Prosecutor says, "What was she doing for work?" Kerry says, "Modeling." Then she recorded Me and You, the song. Prosecutor says, "When did you learn they were dating?" Kerry says, 2007. Prosecutor says, "Did you travel with Cassie and Mr. Combs?" Kerry says, "Yes, Ibiza, Miami." Prosecutor says, "What drugs did Mr. Combs provide?" Kerry says, "Molly, marijuana, ecstasy." Prosecutor says, "Which did Mr. Combs take?" Kerry says, "All of them." Prosecutor says, "Did you take drugs alone with Cassie?" Kerry says, "Opiates." Prosecutor says, "How did Mr. Combs act?" Kerry says, "He would yell at Cassie. She lost her confidence big time, lost her spark." Prosecutor says, "Did Mr. Combs talk down to Cassie?" Kerry says, "Yes, about her looks, who she talked to." Prosecutor says, "Did he contact you looking for her?" Kerry says, "A lot. Sometimes he would call 50 times in a row." Prosecutor says, "Would others call you for him?" Kerry says, "Yes, Christina, Corem, or KK." Prosecutor says, "Did you witness assaults?" Kerry says, "Yes. First in the Hollywood Hills, Ruben, one of his security guards, was there." Prosecutor says, "What did Mr. Combs do to Cassie?" Kerry says, "He kicked her." Prosecutor says, "What did she do?" Kerry says, "Nothing. I told Ruben to do something. He indicated he wouldn't." Prosecutor says, "Then what?" Kerry says, "We left the house. Cassie and I were hiding by someone's front steps. And we heard Diddy driving by looking for us. But Cassie went back to his house." Prosecutor says, "And the next time?" Kerry says, "In Jamaica, Cassie had gone to the bathroom, and after a few minutes, Sean said she was taking too long, and he left me, and then I heard her screaming. It was guttural, terrifying. I heard her screaming, so I went to the long hallway. They were coming out of the master bedroom. He was dragging her by her hair. Diddy dragged Cassie outside and threw her to the ground, where she hit her head on a brick." Prosecutor says, "What did you see next?" Kerry says, "I thought she was knocked out. Then she got up and ran into a wooded area." Prosecutor says, "What happened next?" Kerry says, "There were 2 golf carts in the driveway. I got in one and Sean got in the other. We went in different directions looking for Cassie. Prosecutor says, did you find her? Kerry says, yes. Then we hid in a ditch, whispering. Prosecutor says, what about the incident at Comstock apartment? Kerry says, Cassie came back with a hoodie covering her face. Then Sean came and tried to get in, hitting the door with a hammer. I called D-Rock. Prosecutor says, did he get in? Kerry says, no. Then the police came. Prosecutor says, what happened? Kerry says Cassie wouldn't show them her ID. Nothing happened. They left a card. Prosecutor says, read this message. Did you send an attachment? Kerry says, yes. A photo of the card the detective left. Prosecutor says, did Mr. Combs ever assault you? Kerry says, yes. He hit me with a wood coat hanger and choked me. Prosecutor says, where did the hanger hit you? Kerry says, behind my right ear. Prosecutor says, what did he express concern about? Kerry says, who Cassie was cheating on him with. Prosecutor says, who did you speak to about it? Kerry says, Ryan, Sean's old assistant. Prosecutor says, what did he do? Kerry says, nothing. She shrugs. I have not spoken with Cassie since. Then the judge says, let's break. Then the jury left for lunch. The arguments continued. The judge says, what's your best citation to try to get this evidence in? Prosecutor says, 614F3D 30 at 39 and 945F3D at 706. The judge says, I look at them and we'll come back. Then Mark Agnifilo says, I haven't seen this before. The judge says, you all need to get something to eat. Let's take a break. And then they are back from the brief lunch. The judge says, if I let this in, Ms. Ventura could be recalled as a witness. Prosecutor says, I doubt that we would call her. The judge cut her off and says, the defense could call her back to the stand. Prosecutor says, I doubt that she would be available. The judge says, the evidence is out. The judge says, I anticipate Mr. David James will be the next witness. How is he relevant? Prosecutor says, as to the means and methods of the enterprise, Mr. Combs threatening to assault employees. And then the jury enters. Prosecutor says no further questions for Ms. Morgan. The judge says cross-examination. Then Diddy's lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, says, you were Ms. Ventura's best friend since 2004. Kerry says, actually 2001. We met waiting for the Polaroids to develop. I was living in Buffalo. She was in Connecticut. Agnifilo says, then you were both in New York City? Kerry says, I stayed downtown. She moved to Harlem. Agnifilo says, have you ever met Kim Porter? Kerry says, yes, probably at a concert. Agnifilo says, was Cassie ever jealous? Kerry says, yeah. Yes. Agnifilo says, and the other way? Kerry says, Cassie was speaking with Michael B. Jordan and Sean got jealous. She was trying to leave him. Agnifilo says, you were both using drugs? Kerry says, no, we were in South Africa. Agnifilo says, did you learn about Gina? Kerry says, yes. Gina was a big problem for Cassie. Gina would not go away. He was having a full-on relationship with this little girl. Cassie found out about it. It went on for a really long time. I'm pretty sure she got pregnant, that Gina girl. Just a quick reminder, Gina Hahn is the young woman who claimed that after she got pregnant with Diddy's child, he offered to pay her $50,000 to get rid of it. And the day she was supposed to get rid of it, she thought he was going to be with her. But he wasn't around For a whole week, she couldn't get in contact with him. So she felt so lonely. She didn't want to get get rid of the baby. So one time he was fighting her in the closet, and then he threw her on the ground, and he was just punching her on the side of her face, and she was covering her face. And then Diddy started stomping on her belly, and she lost the baby. And she went on and unalive a second baby because he did not want to have any kids with these women. Okay, so back to Kerry Morgan's testimony. So Kerry says Gina was a big problem. She wouldn't go away. He was having a full-on relationship with this little girl. Cassie found out about it. It went on for a really long time. Mark Agnifilo says, why do you call her that? Kerry says, she acts like that. She's younger than us. Agnifilo says, when you say Sean came and hammered on the door, why did the police come? Kerry says, they said because of the noise. Agnifilo says, what did they say to you? Kerry says Cassie was visibly injured, but she didn't say anything. Agnifilo says, you two were best friends for 18 years, but now you haven't spoken with her since 2018? Kerry says, that's true. Agnifilo says, at the danger of being capital obvious, that's a long time. She's moved on? Prosecutor says, objection. Agnifilo says, why haven't you spoken with her? Kerry says, I draw the line at physical abuse. The reason I stopped speaking to her was she was not supportive of me after that incident, referring to Diddy attacking her with the hanger. Agnifilo says, you reach a settlement with Miss Ventura. Kerry says, I didn't demand money from anyone. She offered it. The money wasn't coming from her. She was the in-between for Mr. Combs. We haven't spoken since. The last time I spoke to Sean was the night of the assault, and the last time I saw Cassie was when I signed the NDA. By the way, an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement where you cannot speak about whatever happened. And Kerry received $30,000 from the incident where Diddy hit her with a wooded hanger because she was threatening a lawsuit regarding the incident. Okay, so back to Kerry's testimony. Agnifilo shows Kerry photos and then says, do you know if Louis Hayes is a self-help author about self-affirmation? Kerry says yes. Agnifilo says, why did you send Diddy this with words of encouragement? Kerry says, I don't remember sending it. Agnifilo says, do you believe Mr. Combs did not love himself? Kerry says, sometimes it seemed like he did not. Agnifilo says, I want to show you a few more photos, but first, let's talk about the incident when he put his hands on your neck. Were you and Cassie using any drugs at the time? Kerry says no. Agnifilo says, what did he say? Kerry says, he said, who is she cheating with? Agnifilo says, you went to an urgent care and not the hospital? Kerry says, right. Agnifilo says, but you told the prosecutors it was bloody and you went to the hospital. Kerry says, I don't remember that. Agnifilo says, look at this, 3,500 material not shown to the jury. Kerry says, I see that I said that. Now, cross-examination. Prosecutor Foster says, do you remember Mr. Agnifilo asking you about an incident in LA? Agnifilo says, objection. The judge says, overruled. Foster says, and he hit her, like in Jamaica, arguing about jealousy. What happened in Jamaica? Kerry says he dragged Cassie by her hair, a 50-yard hallway. Foster says, was he talking about jealousy? Kerry says no. He said she spent too long in the bathroom. Foster says nothing further. The judge says any recross examination? Agnifilo says no. Oh, I forgot to mention this. When Kerry was asked why she and Cassie never became friends again, Kerry says she still has not reached out to me. And I'm sure she doesn't have the same phone number. And also, Diddy's defense team is trying to paint a picture that Diddy would only be abusive when he was jealous, but when prosecutor asked Kerry about those two incidents, the one in Jamaica and then the one in the apartment in LA, the prosecutor says prior to that, what if any argument did you hear about jealousy? And Kerry says none. So basically, Diddy wasn't beating Cassie because of jealousy. It was not about jealousy. Diddy is just a demon. Okay? So yeah, you guys, that is all for Kerry's testimony. Yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notifications so you don't miss any updates because I will be bringing them to you. All right? Okay. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.